Welcome to the debate. Hello, we are back here with Command Figures. Picture this. It's 2012.
Right, a really crucial year.
Exactly. On paper, the handover of power in Beijing looks like a flawless, peaceful triumph of modern bureaucracy. But, behind closed doors, the system is just rotting from the inside out.
Oh, absolutely rotting.
It is fantastic to see so many university students filling the hall for our symposium today. You're joining us as we dive into one of the most consequential and honestly perhaps misunderstood geopolitical shifts of the 21st century.
Yeah, the total transformation of political succession in the People's Republic of China.
Right. So we are taking on a central question today. Does Xi Jinping's unprecedented consolidation of power and his dismantling of succession norms inherently risk a destabilizing future succession crisis? I argue that Xi's centralization replaces the fragile, gridlocked factionalism of the past with a unified ideological framework, mitigating the immediate risks of a succession crisis and paving the way for a managed transition.
And I argue that by dismantling the institutional guardrails built over the last 40 years, Xi's personalized rule practically guarantees a systemic crisis upon his eventual inevitable departure.
To really grasp the mechanics of Chinese elite politics today, we can't just look at the headlines. We have to trace the chronological necessity of what Xi actually inherited. Let's go back to that 2012 handover from Hu Jintao to Xi Jinping.
Which, as you mentioned, looked great on paper.
Right. The official narrative was that this was a victory of institutionalization. The transition was orderly, but we know now that the collective leadership model, which had been established decades prior under Deng Xiaoping, had basically mutated. It had devolved into severe, paralyzing factionalism.
It was certainly a fractured landscape, but
Wait, let me just paint the picture of how fractured it really was, because it is crucial context. You had what was referred to behind closed doors as the 9 dragons ruling the water.
right. And for those unfamiliar with that phrase, the 9 dragons refers to the 9 members of the Politburo Standing Committee at the time. Essentially, they were acting like untouchable kings of their own distinct domains.
Exactly.
I mean, one controlled the economy, one controlled propaganda, one controlled security, and they functionally did not answer to each other or even to the general secretary.
Is a recipe for total ideological stagnation and just massive systemic corruption. Look at a figure like Zhou Yongkang. He didn't just have a seat at the table. He built a vast independent security fiefdom.
A massive one.
Right? The budget for domestic security under Zhou was actually larger than the national defense budget. He was running a state within a state. So when Xi initiates his massive anti-corruption campaigns and elevates himself to core leader, these aren't merely the power grabs of an autocrat.
Well,
They are emergency structural corrections. The Chinese Communist Party was terrified of peaceful evolution. The idea that Western democratic norms or internal decay would slowly rot the state from the inside, leading to a Soviet-style collapse.
Right, the Soviet collapse is always the ghost in the room.
Exactly. By removing those rival power centers, Xi established a stable equilibrium. He centralized decision-making so the state could finally execute long-term goals without the paralyzing infighting of the Hu Jintao years.
I come at it from a different way. To truly appreciate the extreme danger of what Xi has done, you have to understand the tragic chronology of succession that predates this reform era.
Okay, let's trace it.
You say he saved the party from collapse, but by entirely dismantling the guardrails of succession, he is risking a slide right back into the lethal volatility of the Mao Zedong era.
Lethal volatility is a pretty strong phrase.
But an accurate one. Look at Mao's chaotic, bloody successions. You had his chosen heir, Lin Biao, who allegedly attempts a coup and dies in a mysterious plane crash fleeing the country in 1971.
Right.
You had Liu Shaoqi, the president of the republic, who is sidelined, purged, and physically beaten by Red Guards until he dies in captivity. You had the Gang of Four arrested just months after Mao's death.
It was definitely a dark period.
It was. And that is what a system without succession rules looks like. Deng Xiaoping survived that era, and he recognized that personality-driven dictatorship was an existential threat to the nation.
Sure, he made changes.
Vital changes. That is exactly why Deng instituted vital corrections, most notably the the 1982 Constitution, which created a strict two-term limit for the presidency. He also brought in informal norms, like the unwritten rule of 7 up, 8 down.
Meaning the age limits.
Right, meaning if you are 67, you can be promoted to the Politburo, but if you are 68, you must retire.
But let's be intellectually honest here. Those rules were always imperfect. They were applied selectively when it was convenient for party elders to purge rivals.
Yeah, well,
Imperfect, yes. But they provided something utterly essential to any bureaucracy, which is predictability. They were essentially a peace treaty among elites.
a peace treaty?
Exactly. They protected the system from a return to one-man dictatorship. Because of those rules, elites could plan their careers. Factions could bargain within defined parameters.
Right, the backroom bargaining.
And most importantly, losing a political struggle meant you retired to a comfortable house in the capital, rather than facing a prison sentence or a firing squad.
Okay, I see the contrast you're drawing.
So when Xi Jinping suddenly forces the removal of presidential term limits in 2018 and deliberately sidelines groomed successors like Sun Zin-sai and Hu Jintao, he destroys the single most important political reform of the post-Mao era. He traded the regular, peaceful transfer of power for personalized autocracy.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Let's look at the mechanics of the 2018 constitutional amendment. I want to challenge the idea that this was the destruction of an institution.
How else do you frame removing term limits?
Think of it as a massive corporate restructuring. Imagine a sprawling, failing enterprise. A new CEO comes in and realizes the company is literally going bankrupt from internal gridlock.
Okay, I am listening.
The gridlock is happening because the divisional vice presidents are running their own conflicting fiefdoms, just like we saw with the 9 dragons.
I am trying to wrap my head around this corporate restructuring analogy because it sounds remarkably clinical for what was essentially a constitutional coup.
It is clinical because it is structural. Prior to 2018, the Chinese system had a dangerous mechanical friction built into it.
Friction in what sense?
Well, the 3 top offices in the country are the party general secretary, the chairman of the Central Military Commission, and the president. Historically, only the presidency, which is actually the least powerful of the 3, had term limits.
Right, the other 2 did not.
Exactly. So if the president steps down after 2 terms, but the party secretary doesn't, you inevitably create 2 competing centers of gravity. Remember what happened in 2002?
The handover to Hu Jintao?
Right. Jiang Zemin gave up his civilian titles to Hu Jintao, but he retained the chairmanship of the military for 2 more years. That split authority totally paralyzed Hu's early agenda.
It was definitely a messy overlap.
And dangerous. The 2018 removal of term limits simply unified the timelines of these 3 offices. Xi unified the roles to ensure that executive, military, and diplomatic power reside securely in one predictable center.
That corporate restructuring analogy might hold up if a CEO ultimately answered to a board of directors, but she has eliminated the board. Deng's term limits, however selectively applied they were in the 90s, were a structural check against a personality cult.
But a weak check, as we've established?
Maybe, but the actual mechanism of how this 2018 revision happened completely undercuts your argument that it was just administrative housekeeping.
How so? I mean, it was ratified by the National People's Congress.
Ratified under duress. She sprang this constitutional revision on the Central Committee with almost no warning. Kai Shah, a former professor at the Central Party School, has spoken extensively about this.
Right, the prominent critic.
Yes, and she noted that delegates were practically forced to swallow the revision without a whisper of debate. There was no institutional deliberation.
Well, swift action was sometimes needed.
But at what cost? As the scholar Myron Rush wrote back in 1962, in any personal dictatorship or tyranny, one thing is certain: someday there will be a succession crisis.
I think applying 1960s Cold War logic.
Let me just finish the point, because Xi hasn't just unified titles to make things administratively neat. He has actively made absolute loyalty to himself the sole currency of survival. He demands strict adherence to what the party calls the 2 safeguards.
Yes, safeguarding Xi's core status and the party's centralized authority.
Exactly. That's not a unified timeline. That's a unified loyalty pledge.
And I would argue that this unified authority, this centralization, is exactly what is providing stability today. If you want proof that the system works to prevent the kind of factional warfare that brings down governments, look at the 20th Party Congress in 2022.
Oh, I watched it very closely.
Then you saw it was an absolute masterclass in elite consolidation. She successfully packed the Politburo Standing Committee with a cohesive group of loyalists.
Right, essentially his own guys.
But these aren't just yes men. They are seasoned technocrats and trusted aides, men like Li Qiang, Tai Chi, and Ding Xuxiang. You keep warning of a looming succession crisis.
Because one is coming.
But mechanically speaking, a crisis requires opposing factions fighting for control of the levers of state. Because there are no independent factional bases left to tear the party apart, a future transition, whether that happens in 2027 or 2032, will actually be remarkably smooth.
Smooth?
Yes, because it will be executed by a unified block of leaders who share the exact same ideological vision.
I am sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The absence of a designated successor doesn't magically create harmony among elites. It creates a highly volatile theater of patronage.
A theater of patronage? Unpack that for us.
Okay, imagine you are a mid-level provincial governor or a rising minister, right now. Because no one actually knows who is next in line to lead the country, there is no heir to align yourself with.
So you just focus on your job?
No, you focus on survival. Ambitious officials must aggressively, constantly demonstrate that they are the most Shiish of all candidates. It becomes a race to the ideological extreme.
I think that's a bit of an overstatement.
We have already seen the symptoms of this in daily governance. Look at the radicalization of the wolf warrior diplomats over the last few years.
Wait, you think wolf warrior diplomacy is just a domestic audition?
Absolutely. By being overly aggressive, flashy, and perfectly aligned with Xi's perceived preferences on the global stage, these officials are attempting to jump ahead in the promotion hierarchy. It is a survival tactic.
But even if we accept that framing, those officials are still operating firmly within the parameters set by the center. They are executing foreign policy aggressively, yes, but they are not challenging the leadership. That is still stability.
It is stability until the leadership ages, and the stakes become existential. If you have an aging leader surrounded by loyalists who are fiercely competing for his favor, and you have stripped away the clear institutional rules dictating how power will be transferred, the system is primed for an explosion.
I disagree.
Just look back at that same 20th Party Congress you praised. The whole world watched the former leader, Hu Jintao, being physically led off the stage.
Which official channels said was a health issue.
Right. But whether that was health-related or political, the visual was a visceral, theatrical signal to the entire bureaucracy. The old networks of power, the old protégés, are finished.
A changing of the guard.
A total erasure. If you are a loyalist today, you know that without your specific patron, you are completely exposed. There is no institutional safety net. That fear breeds daily paranoia, not long-term stability.
Let me jump in here, because your argument assumes that Xi Jinping has no plan. That contradicts everything we know about his highly methodical approach to statecraft.
A plan doesn't guarantee execution.
Sure, but to understand his long-term strategy for succession, we have to zoom out and look at the timeline up to 2035. Xi's tenure is intrinsically tied to the state's long-range objectives through the year 2035.
Right, the 2035 goals?
And the complete modernization of the People's Liberation Army. We are talking about a massive structural overhaul under his holistic national security framework.
And what does that framework practically mean for succession?
It means that national security is no longer just about the military. The doctrine integrates 20 different areas: political security, economic security, cyber, deep sea, technological, you name it.
It's all-encompassing.
Exactly. To restructure a nation of 1.4 billion people, to meet these goals, overcoming immense bureaucratic resistance requires uncontested authority. The bureaucratic friction of a two-term limit physically prevents that kind of multi-decade restructuring.
So he just stays forever?
He is retaining power deliberately to navigate China through what he calls great changes unseen in a century.
Retaining power until he is 82 years old.
Yes, exactly. He requires that authority to push through painful domestic reforms and navigate severe geopolitical headwinds, like technological decoupling with the US.
Okay, but where's the succession mechanism?
Here it is. Once the military and the state apparatus are fully modernized by 2035, he can safely appoint a successor from this very loyalist bloc you mentioned.
Just pick someone out of the crowd.
Someone like Ding Zhushang, who is young enough to take the reins. She can then step back, acting as a stabilizing kingmaker in his later years, very much like Deng Xiaoping did in the 1990s. The transition will be managed on his timeline, ensuring the continuity of the state's grand strategy without a factional bloodbath.
That is a staggering gamble on human biology.
Governance is always a gamble.
But we are essentially talking about betting the stability of the world's second largest economy and a nuclear-armed superpower on the cardiovascular health of an 82-year-old man.
Well, medical science.
Plunging the country into immediate chaotic turmoil.
It's a completely different era.
The biology isn't. The immense risk here is sudden incapacitation. If Xi suffers a massive stroke tomorrow, or dies suddenly like Stalin did in 1953, there is absolutely no roadmap for what happens next.
The party would convene.
And do what? You praised his loyalists earlier. You called them a cohesive bloc, but think about their structural weakness. Men like Kai Chi or Li Chang have no independent power bases.
They have the party's backing.
No, they don't have deep historical ties to the military. Their authority is entirely 100% derived from Xi Jinping.
I grant you their power comes from the center, but they have the organizational apparatus of the party. The CCP of the 2020s is fundamentally different and far more institutionalized at the administrative level than it was in 1976.
But in a sudden power vacuum, an administrative apparatus doesn't govern. It becomes a battlefield.
I think the institutions would hold.
Without the man at the center, we could see the Politburo instantly splinter into rival factions backing disparate successors. Furthermore, think about the military.
The PLA is strictly under party control.
Right now, yes. But without an active, dominant civilian leader holding the Central Military Commission together, the PLA could take on an independent political role. They could step in to act as the ultimate arbiter of power, which changes the entire nature of the Chinese state.
That's a very extreme scenario.
And geopolitically, the stakes simply couldn't be higher. Xi's total centralization has systematically removed dissenting voices from the inner circle. When a leader only hears what he wants to hear from subordinates who are terrified for their careers, the likelihood of a catastrophic miscalculation, say over Taiwan, skyrockets.
He still has expert advisors.
But they're afraid. A military failure over Taiwan wouldn't just be a localized policy setback. It could completely shatter the Chinese Communist Party's aura of invincibility, destroy its performance legitimacy, and unravel the state.
I think we have clearly mapped out the absolute highest stakes of this unprecedented political experiment. When you step back and look at the whole picture we've painted today, my position is this. While Xi Jinping's personalization of power is undeniably a radical departure from the recent past, it was a necessary evolution.
I hear you.
The post-Deng model of collective leadership had exhausted its utility. It was breeding deep corruption, siloed fiefdoms, and policy paralysis. To centralize economic and military policymaking, Xi had to act decisively to restructure the system.
Right.
By unifying the party and establishing a cohesive leadership bloc, Xi has laid the necessary groundwork to manage succession on his own timeline. He is prioritizing a holistic national security framework and the state's long-term modernization over flawed, rigid term limits that previously left the country vulnerable to internal decay.
And looking at that exact same picture, my view remains, while Xi has indeed achieved an unprecedented level of administrative control today, we must remember that concentration of power is not the same as continuity of government.
A vital distinction.
By actively eroding the predictable formal guardrails of the Deng era, the very rules designed to prevent a return to Maoist instability, Xi has tied the survival of the entire Chinese political system to his own mortality.
Which is a risk.
A massive one. He has replaced institutional predictability with a theater of patronage.
In doing so, he leaves his nation and the rest of the global economy incredibly vulnerable to a highly destabilizing power vacuum the moment he is no longer able to rule.
This discussion really highlights the profound complexity of the material we've unpacked today. Predicting elite Chinese politics requires a delicate balance.
It really does.
You have to understand both the formal institutions written into the Constitution and the intensely informal power dynamics that operate behind closed doors in Zhongnanhai, the central leadership compound in Beijing.
Exactly.
Thank you for the university students here researching this and for everyone listening. I encourage you to continue exploring these critical historical and geopolitical texts. Ultimately, history will reveal which of these scenarios unfolds, and we leave it to you, our listeners, to form your own conclusion on what the future holds for China.
Thank you for listening. Do not forget to click like and subscribe, and write your opinion in the comment section.